see that and then he hides it. But yeah, there's a strong visual element.
Is there a suggestion? Is there a suggestion of anxiety in the
in the style of the verse?
Yeah.
The verse just says that when she sees this, she's she's beginning to imagine things. He's imagining that another kanya has been born from the dust by the touch of the feet of her. Yeah. Things happening in her.
So,
yeah.
I mean, she's no longer the seeker of souls.
That's,
she is transformed.
Yeah, I think that's also true. Yeah. He's also touching him in a way. It's like his feet have touched her, not only his feet. Yeah, yeah, that's true. I think the way this whole transformation of the rock back into a woman happened is not entirely an automatic thing. It's not just the curse working itself out. By the way, in general, we have these shapas in the literature. It's usually not a purely automatic thing. Usually there's some kind of inner business that goes on. In fact, the shapa, the curse only works because there's some kind of inner state in the subject or the object of the curse. If you think of it like this, that would mean that perhaps Ahalya's appearance as a woman reflects that Rama was actually able to imagine her as such, that rock. He was perhaps able to see or pay attention to something in the rock which that nobody else could see. It was a potentially imaginative and therefore causal act of Rama himself. In other words, this de-automatizes, de-automizes the actual working of the thing. So if what we have here, we have Sita's imagination. We have Rama's empathic understanding of what she is feeling. That anybody can see and understand. So as I said, this seems to be, here's how I can actually understand what's going on in my mind. But there also seems to be some hint that perhaps Rama's imaginative power has this causal effect, or could have it again in general, if he were only to pay attention to what he's looking at. So I think, this is, I mean, you don't have to, I don't know if this is entirely convincing to you, but to me, this is another one of these statements from this period of the centrality of the imaginative life in the minds of an individual person of one kind or another. Remember I said to you yesterday that all perceptual acts have an imaginative component. Remember? Okay. Now, okay, if there's no more comments about this, let me just say a few words. Trying to pull these various thoughts together, and then we'll move into the music. Okay? It's a little different, I think of him as all-seeing, as an omniscient God. I don't think that's why he's anxious. I mean, one could might say that, but I don't see that in. I think he covers the anxious because he has some sort of empathic, intuitive knowledge of what's happening in his mind. That's different from being omniscient. This means he's somehow attuned to her and capable of imagining what is happening. One could, of course, think of it. But, if you're prepared to go as far as I would like to go with this, then one of the definitions of this particular man God, he's a human being, God, would be that he has some imaginative power. Be like a definition of the God, especially the God in his human form. And the importance of that also lies in the fact that, this is a religion, a religious configuration where you have a very powerful contrast to the classical philosophical school, say Advaita. In the classical Advaita, God himself has no kalpana. That's his definition. He cannot imagine anything. He's conscious. He's a kind of pure consciousness. I say he, it's not even a he. But this Brahman, God, let's call it God, it's a kind of awareness that has no content to it. There are no objects in that awareness. It's a kind of free-floating total consciousness that has no object. But it's for sure, and that's what the Advaita philosophers tell us. It lacks an imagination. There's no kalpana in Brahman. Human beings and maybe other beings have kalpana, have imagination in that. So actually, in the early Advaita, imagination is devalued. Just as in the early Nyaya, where people think that imagined ideas are just mistakes. They're just completely, they think they're mistakes. That's the early notion of imagination. Only much later do we get this very complex image. Remember we talked about it yesterday of bhavana and the other related mental functions in the Nyaya. So here's a powerful contrast. Right? This philosophical notion of the pure Vedanta, pure Advaita, as opposed to an image of this human being who's also God, right? And as such has to have a powerful imagination. Okay?
In terms of this kavyam.
What is that?
This kavyam. Like this kavyam.
Oh, Drishyakavyam. Yeah.
This kavyam.
Yeah.
Generally in this kavyam you have a strong response. So if you have if you are doing certain act,
yes,
then definitely the other person is going to follow that act.
Right.
So it is not just only about the attention, but it is very much embedded in that act also. This kavyam.
Something of which is possible to see. That's what we saw last time, and we'll see it again tonight. Very much like that, and we'll be talking just a minute about Savya Kavyam.
Yeah.
So, okay, let me say a few things by way of shaping a little bit what we've seen. So here's my argument in a nutshell, based on the kinds of sources that we've read together. So, if you think of these materials that we've just read, compare them to the early Aham poems that we read. So remember I said to you 3-4 days ago, I said, we moved from a situation in the early poems where there seems to be no idea of mind as such. What there is that ulam. We moved from that to a world where we have ulam, but ulam now means something close to what we would mean by the mind. And I think we should try to characterize that ulam. So it's the same word. This is the problem we had yesterday. Remember, we talked about this. We have these words that continue. They have a very long life. They have a long prehistory. And then they have a continuous possibility to mean something new. So ulam, beautiful example of that, because in the early period, it just means whatever is inside. But by this period, it tends to mean something like the mind. In what sense? So let me just mention the features of it that I think we've already seen. First of all, the ulam is not the same It's the uyu. Remember in the old poems, we had the notion of some um, life breath, some breathing piece of the person, uyu or abi. And we said also that that breathing, which is the core of this Tamil person, that's the real heart of the person. We said that the core of it, remember, it has a kind of rhythm, and that rhythm harmonizes with the rhythm of the world as a whole, remember? So now we start to find something very fascinating. First of all, the uyir is still there, but it is no longer as central. What matters is now this ulam. That's one thing. And the second thing is that the uyir that is there, the breathing, living part of the person, it's no longer synchronized with these external cosmic rhythms. Because the uyir now has only a kind of individualized personal quality. So, I mean, we haven't seen that in the poems that I've been reading to you, but if we had time, I could show it to you. And it's a very profound statement, I think, if you think about it. The uyir initially is a kind of unitary force. It comes in and out of us. It comes in and out of every living being, right? And there seems to be this same rhythm which repeats itself level after level, but not here. Here, each particular ulam has its own rhythm, and that rhythm is not in synchrony with rhythmic breathing. That's a very strong statement about the fact that we're not talking about individualized persons, human beings, for whom being human matters, right? And each one of them is really unique, defined as singular. Okay, is that okay? Everybody's got that? Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing about the ulam is that it knows how to think. It's now full thoughts. If you think about those early poems that we had, so there's all kinds of perceptions. And remember, the outer inner worlds keep intermingling. So we said it's a very porous or permeable kind of innerness, right? That ulam. But now this ulam is full of thoughts. That's a different thing. Not just the kind of intuitive perceptions that we saw in the poems, but actual cognition, strong cognition. Karma is the outstanding feature of the ulam. Okay, another thing, third thing, is that the ulam has an inside. That means it also has an external boundary. This is a bounded entity. There's an inside to the ulam. Not only is it itself inside, it has an inside. It has an interior, right? Like any living being that we might know. Right? And this is an external boundary, and it also means that all the various modes of awareness that we've been talking about, so let's think of what they are. Ordinary awareness. There's this psychotic love madness that we were talking about yesterday, right? Remember Shulman 2 days ago? That too. Think about hallucinations, like Varutini and the Manuturitumut. She's having all these hallucinations. She can't get through the night, right? Like that, we have a series of states, but they are all, listen to this carefully, they are all internal to the mind. They're inside the mind. They're not exogenous. They're not born from outside. They're internal to the mind. So the temptation to think that, there's some kind of invasion of the person by some, external force, like, let's say, desire, or like possession, or something like that, as if it were coming from somewhere else, right? That doesn't seem to be possible now. There are many extreme states. Remember, I'm interested in the extreme states. There are many, and we've seen, think of Shurpanaka again, think of Varutini, we've seen these extreme states, but they're not coming from anywhere except from inside the person, because that same inner quality that I'm talking about, which is the quality of a mind, it is capable of generating these states. And there's also a great interest in these states. There's another element here, which is that the ulam has different parts. So we've spoken about some of these parts, or different faculties, or different aspects. There's a question of imagination. There's a question of attention. There's a question of memory. There's all kinds of different functions and aspects that are, part of this ulam. But like the earlier classical bhavana, this ulam, which is somehow centered or built or structured around the creative capacity of the mind, is also capable of connecting with other minds. That's another feature of this ulam, and it's a highly prominent one, as we saw yesterday. Think of the Simantinishwar. There's a kind of medium of connectivity which is built into this mind being, this ulam mind. And it allows for a kind of empathic imagination, like we just saw in this first level. And I said earlier, I'll say it again, that the ulam is now highly individualized, so we're talking about very distinct human beings who have singular voices, like in the Padam poems that we read together, remember? And there is also an element here which I'm going to go into a little bit later, which has to do with visualization. Just a moment. There's something about what the mind is capable of seeing and imagining. So that's what I'm going to leave it at that for now. We'll come back, I guess, on Tuesday and look again at all the things that we've done in the seminar. But I hope you can see that we're in a kind of different world than we were in the early lectures. Any questions about that? Because if not, then I have to start talking about music. I want you to hear something very close to the beginning of that. Anybody want to? Yeah.
There is this theory, interpreting to share of this, where you have reflection without the object also.
Yeah.
It also comes up in the Jnanasis Sutra.
Yeah.
The script to Shankaracharya, but I believe it would be a special share of this.
Yeah,
We just see Uncle that one you can talk about Mayaga. So like a magician, ex nihilo.
Yeah.
But who creates this? It's only the Krishnamurti. With the reflection of one's own self.
Right.
So
but the reflection.
The reflection. They call it Prima Pratibhaya, but there is no object outside.
Yeah. It's a completely internally generated reflection.
Internal.
Yeah, that's right. So that's very nice that you said that, because in the kriti that you're going to hear from Dikshita in just a moment, he uses a beautiful phrase. See if I can find it. You're going to hear this in just a second. Right. Okay. Oh, in the Abhayamba Kritis, Dikshita says that the goddess who's going to interest us today, he calls her Atma Rupa Pratibimba. Atma Rupa Pratibimba, which means something like a counter image of the inner self, yes. Right? Yeah. So this fits exactly with what you were saying, actually.
Because reflecting the outer reality.
Yeah, that's right.
The outer reality is reflecting what is in the mind.
Yeah. Actually, the inner mind is actually sort of generating this pratibimba out of itself, right? And that's a kind of self-definition of the goddess. So, pratibimba is a visual term, right? But let's imagine that it might be something which is not merely visual, but also some kind of audible, oral, sonic, phonic term. In other words, a sound, right? Why not? Yeah.
The sounds. Ahadanada.
Right, yes.
Anahatanada.
Yeah, that's right. The anahatanada, right. So, here's the point. Here's what this is a kind of easy way to get into the connection with the musical materials today, because, we've been talking now for 2 weeks about these kinds of issues. The one thing that we have not talked about at any length is something which I think is very central to the medieval Indian notions of mind in general, and that has to do with these facilities of faculties or aspects of visualization, or some kind of audible variant of that visualization. I said to you earlier I'm interested in extreme states. That's actually how everybody who thinks about the mind in the end ends up working with the pathological materials, the semi-pathological materials. But now I want to shift into something which is not a pathological state at all, and may not be extreme, but it seems to be an inherent faculty of the mind, if we follow the logic of these late medieval materials. And that has to do with these notions of visualizations, meditative practice, deep states of contemplation, including things that one might hear in a musical. So that's the transition. And I'm going to make a kind of argument about this. And I'm going to be talking about Muthuswami Dikshita, the most creative of the three great composers in the Carnatic system. And we're going to see how he handles this and what it means for us and how it works. Okay? This is a bit of an experiment. I don't know how many of you are experienced in Carnatic music. I know some of you sing Hindustani music. So what I thought I would do is the following. I'll give you like a short introduction to this historical moment, to Muthuswami Dikshita himself. A few things about him, we have a biography of him. And to understand the kind of historical situation in which this is happening. And then I'm going to play two kritis for you. One, in order to establish a very basic principle, which I think is the fundamental entrance into this music, that's the principle of iconicity. And the second, in order to say something a little deeper about it, if you're prepared to go with me. Those of you who've had a chance to look at my essay may be already prepared for this somewhere. So here, let me just say there's a kind of interesting historical problem here. As Carnatic music as we know it today, it made a very radical shift at the end of the 18th century and the early 19th century. Carnatic music broke off from what we today call Hindustani, North Indian classical music, sometime perhaps around the 14th or 15th century. Until then, this was a single musical tradition, very rich musical tradition, which was also theorized with musicological texts. You probably know this. By the 15th, 16th century, Carnatic music had been formalized at the Tanjore court by a series of important musicologists. One of them was called Govinda Dikshita. He was a famous theoretician of Carnatic music. Govinda Dikshita was also a minister of Raghunatha Nayaka. And he's the one who is supposed to have fixed in place the system of the ragas that we use in Carnatic music, the Melaka of the system of 72 basic ragas. So for some centuries after this happened, that is, from the moment that Carnatic music became a kind of autonomous and separate development, it existed in two main tracks. On the one hand, this was a courtly music and it was performed in the royal courts, big or small. So like the Nayaka court in Tanjore, like the courts of very small-scale zamindars who also patronized musicians. This was a courtly music, and one of the settings of it was the royal court. That was one. And the other parallel track was in the big Tamil temples. So those of you who've been to Tamil Nadu and traveled there, you know that every Tamil temple has its own, in its own Melam, its musical ensemble, who play nadaswaram and drums and flutes sometimes and to sing. So the musical performance in the classical style, very intrinsic part of the temple repertoire in all the great Tamil temples. Also true in Kerala, although it's a little different in Kerala. All of this precedes what we now think of as Carnatic music. In other words, if you go to Madras or Kakinada or any place in the south, you hear a kacheri, you hear a concert, you're hearing a music that has made a transition from its earlier historical settings into something quite different, into a kind of artistic music, which is meant to be sung on stages. Right? So I think everybody knows that something similar to that happened in Hindustani music, although a little bit later, maybe as late as the early 20th century. Right? But in the South Indian case, it happened at the beginning of the 19th century, or even at the end of the 18th century. There was a kind of revolution. A revolution in taste and in historical setting, in the context of performance, and also to some extent, I think, in the actual manner or modes of performance. And the primary figure, the truly creative figure in this process, is a kind of amazing historical transition, was Muthuswami Dikshita. So again, most of you know there were three famous composers, classical composers in the Carnatic tradition. They were all born in the same little town of Tiruvarur. Yeah, they were all born in Tiruvarur. Dikshitar was born in 1775. He was a junior contemporary of Shyama Shastri, who was another absolutely, superb composer, musician, not as prolific as Dikshitar, not as often performed today. And he was a little older than Tyagaraja, who became, in some ways, the kind of flag bearer of the Carnatic tradition. So, by the way, Tyagaraja Swami lived in Tiruvarur. He composed in Telugu, almost exclusively in Telugu, with the exception of one or two kritis which are in Sanskrit, but basically he composed in Telugu. But Dikshitar composed in Sanskrit. He was a Telugu speaker, Telugu family. That migrated to the Tamil country, but he composed in Sanskrit. There are a few kritis that actually mix the languages. There's a famous one in the series of the Abhayamba Vikriti kritis, which I'm going to be talking about in a moment. The final composition in this series has a raga which is sung in Sanskrit, Tamil, and Telugu, actually. So it's a trilingual thing. And there's no question that at this time, all these kinds of people, that is, musicians, composers, people who listened to them, they were multilingual. They spoke all of these languages, and there was no difficulty for them to move from one language to another. Nonetheless, Muthuswami Dikshita composed in Sanskrit primarily. Shyama Shastri mostly in Telugu. These three composers knew one another. There was a time, I don't think you need to, you don't need me to, no. There was a time when they actually lived, all three of them, on the same street in Tanjavur, West Main Street. There's no question that they knew one another, and there's a very dense intertextual world. They quote one another. This is something which has never been explored. This is the kind of thing that some musicologists, I'm no musicologist, I'm a kind of cultural historian, but this is a trained musicologist should be exploring the fact that these musicians actually quote one another, both textually in the verbal text and in the musical text. But we're going to be talking about Dikshitar today because, to my mind, Dikshitar is the pivotal figure. He is the one who produced this kind of revolution in mode, in method, and in taste. And it's that I wanted to try to explore. So, what do we know? What do we know about Muthuswami Dikshita? Actually, we know quite a lot because there's a biography that was composed by his grandnephew, whom he actually adopted as his son, Subbarama Dikshita. So we have a biography. It's maybe actually a little later than the composer himself. He died in 1835. In Yekkayapuram in circumstances that I'm going to tell you about in a moment because we're going to hear the last kriti that he composed. Okay. By the way, we're talking about kritis. That is about kirtana kritis, compositions that have the same form, more or less, as the old Pada style that we saw with the Annamaya poems, right? So remember the Annamaya poems with their Pallavi, Anupallavi, and Charanams? This is what we find in the kirtana, very similar to them. Padams and Javalis and other such earlier compositions tend to be part of the dance, whereas kritis are not usually like that. Okay? Everybody still listening? Okay. So, Subbarama Dikshita wrote a kind of biography of his granduncle. And in this, we learn quite a lot about the man. First of all, I should tell you that his father, Ramaswamy Dikshita, was a very famous composer and musician in his a virtuoso composer, actually. We still have a raga that he composed. It's a composition with many ragas. To be specific, 108 ragas. You have to imagine a single composition sung over about an hour or an hour and a quarter, in which the singer moves through 108 ragas that are familiar and recognizable to a trained audience. It's an absolutely astonishing virtual feat. Ramaswamy Dikshita produced this raga. He was a court musician, but he was also the main musical figure in the musical tradition of the Tiruvarur temple. So the Tiruvarur temple is a very important temple. Those of you, some of you know the place. I can't go into it very much today, but I do have to tell you one important thing, or something that we need for this particular discussion, which is that in the South Indian Carnatic system, the connection of individual ragas to particular times of the day and night has been lost entirely. So you know from Hindustani music that if you hear somebody singing, I don't know, Yaman at 8 o'clock in the morning, it doesn't sound right. Actually, it sounds kind of unbearable if you're sensitized to that. Or anything that is not exactly within that time frame. That you hear somebody singing Dodi, not at 11 o'clock in the morning, but at the evening time, then it sounds like somebody scraping on a blackboard or something like that to a trained ear. It's not as pleasant for them. Hindustani ragas have an intrinsic association, most of them, with a particular hour of the day or the night, and sometimes with a particular season of the year. And there are other features that go with the raga. So this is something everybody knows. Carnatic ragas used to have this as well, and it's been lost. Part of the transition from the old style of singing into the new style that Dikshita produced has to do with this, shift into the public stage, the public arena, and with it the attrition or loss of these old connections. So that today, if you listen to a kacheri in South India, the singer will sing ragas from all kinds of the day, all times of the day, and you won't even know it. Almost nobody knows. But actually, in the Periyamelam performance in Tiruvarur, in the Tiruvarur temple to this very day, they still sing the ragas according to the pattern of the hours of the day and the night, and the particular pujas, the structure of the ritual day, according to the formula that was set down and fixed in place by Ramaswamy Dikshita, that is to say, by the father of the composer. This maybe will be the only place in South India that this knowledge has survived. It's been studied by a Japanese musicologist, very fine musicologist called Terada, and he's actually managed to bring this information back into currency, at least among the musicologists. So why is this important? See, again, if you go to a concert today anywhere in South India, you'll hear these ragas sung as if they had absolutely no connection to any time of the day or the night. But these ragas are specific to particular places and particular deities. And in the case of the goddess that I'm going to be talking about, Abhayamba, in a place called Mayavaram or Mayavathurai, so I can tell you that she's an afternoon goddess. Her ragas and the set that Dikshita produced, they are nearly all of them ragas meant to be sung at the time of what's called the Sayan Rachai, that is to say the afternoon service around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She belongs to that slot of time. I don't know if that seems odd to you, but goddesses, like human beings, they're also human beings who are not so good in the morning or better in the afternoon or in the evening. It's also true of gods and goddesses. So this was information that had some kind of intrinsic value. And it's not an insignificant loss that this has now become clear. Okay, so I'm going back. Ramaswamy Dikshita, that is the Muthuswamy Dikshita's father, is the person who formalized the system of the ragas at the Tiruvarur temple, which has still survived until today. Possibly the last place in South India. Is this completely foreign to all of you, or is this something that you know? If it's something that you know, I'll move on to other things.
No, please continue.
Yeah, okay. All right. So when this composer was still a very young boy, 6 or 7 years old, the father, Ramaswamy Dikshita, moved to a place called Manali, which is a suburb today, it's actually within the larger city of Chennai. In those days, it was a northern suburb of Madras. So we're talking about the late 18th century. Right? Manali was a colonial, kind of a colonial station or factory. And it was a place where people who that is, merchants, accountants, people who knew several languages, including English or French, were capable of making huge fortunes. And there was a person there, a Dubhat, that is to say, this bilingual person who served as an interpreter for the East India Company. They call him Chinnaya. His real name is Venkatakrishna Muttuppa. He was one of these entrepreneurs, and he was making a lot of money in Manali, and he wanted a court musician. Because remember, I said to you just a moment ago that these musicians, one of the settings for the classical and Carnatic music was the royal court. So a rich or nouveau riche merchant like this Chinnaya would very naturally look for a good musician to come and compose music and perform music at his court. He found Ramaswamy Dikshita, and the whole family moved to Manali, and the boy grew up there. Talking about Muthuswamy Dikshit, who grew up there, and he was exposed there, interestingly, to music of a very different type than he had ever heard in the Tiruvarur temple. For example, he heard English music, Western music. Dikshita is famous for having composed what are called Notruswaras. That is to say, compositions that are actually in some English note, right? That are in English notes. God Save the Queen, for example. He has a kriti which doesn't sound very much to our ears like God Save the Queen, but actually that's what it is, that melody. He heard melodies and he heard other instruments, and his younger brother, Dikshita's younger brother, is also the person who was responsible for assimilating the violin to Carnatic music. So, today, if you hear a Carnatic concert, it's unthinkable without a violin. Always, absolutely always, you need the violin. That was an innovation of the late 18th century. And in this same family, you can see that we're talking about a very creative family of musicians who prepared to experience. Boy grew up in this multilingual environment in which there were other musical influences, and he was clearly prepared to experiment, as we can see from material later in his life. When he was about 13 or 14, a wandering tantrika ascetic called Chidambaranathan came by Manali and took the boy away with him to North India, to Benares. And he lived for some years, we don't know exactly how many years, in Benares, where he apparently also learned Hindustani music. So you can see that we're in a musical environment where things were kind of in flux and changing. And he was somehow open to a wider world. When he came back, he's supposed to have begun composing. First of all, he was initiated into the Sri Vidya. He was a upasika of the Sri Vidya, that is to say, the goddess Tripura Sundari, most beautiful in the cosmos. And he was initiated by this same Chidambaranatha Yogin in Benares, and became a believer in the Sri Vidya tantric system. So once we're in the Sri Vidya tantric system, we're already very close to the materials about visualization and its musical counterpart. When he came back, he's supposed to have begun singing kritis, composing kritis, his first poems, at the temple of Tirutani, that is Kanihai in northern Tamil Nadu, and he composed his first compositions were a set of 8 vibhakti kritis, 8 sets of kritis, one for each of the Sanskrit vibhakti cases. So you have Pratama and Dvitiya and Tritiya, that is nominative, accusative, instrumental cases. Sanskrit has 8 different cases, and Dikshita was in the habit of composing sets of kritis like this, in which this particular deity was going to be addressed sequentially in each one of the Sanskrit cases. Is that something that I have to explain? Is that clear to you? Is that, yeah? Okay. Because, and the importance of this lies in the fact that we have a composer who produced sets of kritis, sets of compositions on particular deities, and particularly goddesses. The goddesses of the various local temples in Tanjore. He spent his life in the Kaveri Delta. He moved from temple to temple, and towards the end of his life, he moved south to a place called Yettayapuram, in the far south of the Tamil country, where he was the guest of the Zamindar of Yettayapuram, and there he died. So I just want to tell you the following story about the day he died, and I want you to listen to the kriti that he composed on the day that he died. Okay? Because here we have a principle that is of some importance to what I want to say to you. So the story is that the Dikshita, you have to remember, he's an upasaka of the goddess. He knew that he was going to die that day. On the morning that he died, the royal elephant, the elephant of the Zamindar of Yettayapura, broke loose from its bounds. The elephant was usually tied up in the palace. It broke loose and went rushing or stampeding through the little town of Yettayapura. So it came to the banks of the river, and it was still trumpeting and crying out loudly. And they couldn't get control of it. So at that point, the Zamindar was supposed to have come to visit his court musician, namely Muthuswami Dikshita. Remember, this is the day of his death. And he told him this emergency that had happened with the elephant. His elephant was loose and was making this huge noise, and they couldn't contain it. Dikshita said to him, "It's okay. The elephant is broken free. It will come home." And then he sang this kriti that I want you to hear now. This is a remarkably beautiful composition. It's called Ehi Annapurna. It's addressed to the goddess Annapurna, goddess of Benares. Annapurna, the goddess who gives food. And the singular thing that I want you to listen for here is the fact that you're going to hear that the pivotal point in this kriti is the high note ni. If you go up the raga scale, sarigama pada ni da, right? So those of you who know music will have no difficulty in identifying this ni. Those of you who perhaps don't identify it orally, you'll still be able to notice the high note ni, which attracts to itself the energy of the poem. Ni, in the tradition of Sanskrit musicology, is the sound that an elephant makes when it is trumpeted. So remember that this elephant is loose, and this elephant has broken free. And this is the last moment, the last composition in the life of the composer before he too was about to break. Okay? So there's a principle involved, and I'll spell it out, but first let's listen to the kriti. Okay, so this will take about maybe 8 or 9 minutes. It's in the raga called, what's it? Oh, we have tea now. Okay, so we'll stop now and have tea, and then I'll play the kriti. Okay, that's good. Yeah, okay, we'll stop the kriti. We'll take a short break because we have to leave at 5.
There's some chocolates on the table. Please help yourself. Thanks for the fun. They turned the clock. Whenever the beggar came to the door of food, the Sunday, you stick your hand in your
Oh, do you want to listen to like one chocolate note? One chocolate note. Chocolate.